I just want to present John Barentine, if everybody's okay with that, and we'll get started. Is that okay? Okay.
Well, thank you, Tom, for the introduction. As Tom said, my name is John Barentine. I'm the Director of Public Policy with International Dark Sky Association in Tucson, which I drove from to here this morning to be with you all this evening, and I thank you for the invitation to come and talk to you tonight. So what I'm going to do in the next about 17 minutes or so that nobody gets too bored, is I'm going to give you the biggest of biggest pictures and quickly zoom in on the part of the world that we're in right now. And I'm going to address 3 questions. So by the time I'm done speaking, we're going to go through this, and hopefully the answers to these questions will be very clear. You probably have all your individual motivations for why you're here, but why are we doing this is a very good question to ask and to answer. I'm going to tell you what the problem is that we're attempting to address with our tour tonight, and what will follow from it, and tell you practically what can we do about this. And I hope that by the end, once I've answered those questions, that not only will you know those answers, but you'll have a deeper appreciation for why we care about the night and what we can do about it here in San Bernardino County. So why are we doing this? So I said I was going to start with the biggest of biggest pictures. So here's the whole world. And what you're looking at is a map of the world with a color coding overlaid. And I know that that legend up there in the corner is far too small to read, but I'll tell you what the colors symbolize. The colors on this map are predictions based on satellite measurements for how bright the night sky is in any location on Earth. If you stand on the ground and you look at the spot directly overhead, a place it's called the zenith. So what they do is they take measurements of the light at night on the Earth from the satellite. They run it through a model for how that light moves through the atmosphere, and they can predict basically, can you see the stars or not? If you're in one of these areas that's this kind of darkest blue or even black, or even better if you're out here in the ocean, you have a great view of the night sky. But as the colors get increasingly green, yellow, orange, red, etc., the sky is getting harder and harder and harder to see. And the reason is because of all of that light on the ground, which I'm going to try to convince you is important beyond the question of whether you can see the night sky. So it's not just for astronomy people like me. So I also said I was going to get really local really fast. So here is some brand new data. This was just published this week, quite literally. So if we take this map and we zoom in on just North America, and we break it down now by county, same color scheme, right? So the brighter, warmer colors are increasing amounts of light at the zenith, and you'll see kind of what you can sort of expect, right? The big cities, the counties where the big cities are located, are generally where that light is. But I want to point out a couple of things. One is, no one lives in western North Dakota. What's going on there? It turns out that it's light from the oil industry, fracking the Bakken shale. It actually goes up into Canada from there. One of the other places it lights up is this part of South Texas, where the same sort of thing is going on. But otherwise, mostly what you're seeing here is a representation of human settlement. Not entirely, of course. You know, Clark County, Nevada, what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas. Its light doesn't stay there. But there are vast swaths of territory, especially in places like Alaska, where the black colors are, where the sky is essentially pristine. There's no light pollution there at all, which is a reflection of the fact that nobody lives there, and it's really hard to do any kind of industry there, at least so far. So let's continue to zoom in on our neck of the woods, where we're at tonight. And I'm going to do some overlays on this map. So it's just a Google map. Everybody's probably looked at something like this before. I had to distort this. It's not that Nevada and northern Arizona are falling off the world here, but I wanted to make San Bernardino County look very flat and not distorted. So I had to distort the map a bit. So there's the county. We're down here right now. Of course, the county is the largest municipal county in the United States, if I remember correctly. So covering a lot of territory. What's in there? Well, part of the greater LA area is there, of course. Part of Joshua Tree National Park, which, as you're probably aware, is an international dark sky park. the Mojave National Preserve, part of the southern end of Death Valley, which is another international dark sky park. But you also have a couple of defense industry installations here. So we have the Marine Base, and then we have Fort Irwin that's kind of in this area. There's even a tiny little bit of Edwards Air Force Base that sticks into San Bernardino County. And we're going to hear from the military perspective, I believe, a little bit later in the evening about why all of this business about light pollution matters to them. So we also have some freeways running across here, which is going to be relevant in a moment when I show you another overlay. So this is the context. So I'm going to do another overlay now. So here in even greater detail is that same mapping information that I was showing you previously on the global scale and then on the national scale, and now we're getting very, very local. So again, wherever you see the bright reds here, that's where the light is the brightest. And in the west, that almost always means where the greatest density of population is located. So here's Joshua Tree. Here's this dark sky park with Palm Springs right on its front doorstep and a little bit of light coming from up here in our area. Notice that you can see a chain of lights running down I-15 and I-40. Some of those are places like truck stops. Some of that light is from automobile headlights that can be seen from space. So now I'm going to do one more overlay. So now this is again that map of brightness of the night sky. So this is looking down from overhead. This is a satellite view of the actual measured light. And this is what we get if we're on the ground looking up. And what's important to notice is that some of the last remaining true darkness in Southern California is in San Bernardino County. But you also have a slice of some of the territory that has effectively been lost because of the growth in and around Los Angeles. And you have every shade in between. Every one of the colors on here is another step in the brightness of the night sky. So what we're trying to do is twofold. One is we want to keep what we have, and the other is, to the greatest extent we can, we want to try to roll some of this back. But we want to do this in a way that's not going to damage the local economy. It's not going to take something away from people in terms of their private property rights. It's not going to increase crime or any of the usual concerns that we have, because we believe that if lighting is done well, that none of those things are consequences of it. We can have dark skies, but we can also have all of the other concerns that people have that are related to lighting. They can peacefully coexist. And that's kind of what we want to try to do here by improving things in San Bernardino County. So broadly speaking, what is the problem that we're trying to address? I've kind of been hinting at what's going on here. What we're trying to deal with is light pollution. And there's no necessarily dictionary definition of it. There's not something at all the practitioners agree on. This is my definition, which covers some of what you see in this picture. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But the broad definition of light pollution is anything that has to do with the use of artificial light at night, so think outdoor lighting, that has some undesirable impact, right? So what that suggests is that not all outdoor lighting is light pollution. Some of that light has a very legitimate purpose, and we need it. Our society needs it for the benefit of everything from safe transit at night to having a nighttime economy. But what we're getting at is, when does it cross a line? When do you start to have effects that you don't like? So part of what's going on here in the background is something we call sky glow that I'm going to come back to. That's light pollution. Glare. If you've come around a corner at night on some of these roads around here away from the city where people have their bright lights on, everybody's had this experience. You come around a curve, somebody's got their brights on, they don't switch them off fast enough. You are momentarily blinded by that light. That's glare, that's light pollution. Light trespass is light pollution. The number of calls that we get a week to my office that start off, so my neighbor has a porch light. And everybody, I think, has had this experience too, where you have somebody across the way from you puts in a bright new light over their carport, or has a porch light, security light, what have you, that's shining into your windows at night in a way that you don't want. That is light pollution. These are just a few examples, but we want to address all of them. And there are sensible ways to do that I'm going to suggest to you. So the why part of this is all of these things. And I could go on for an hour about why light pollution touches on all of these areas, maybe in some senses that you would actually find surprising. But the idea behind what I'm showing you here is that there really is, in a sense, something in this for everybody. A lot of people think that the crusade for dark skies that we're on is about astronomy or about an aesthetic appreciation of the night. That is certainly part of it, but it is far from the only reason that we do this. We do this because we're centered on people, right? It would be a good thing for our environment, perhaps, if our wildlife were in better condition than they are. We worry about our own health as individual people. We worry about where are we going to get all the energy to run the world in the future. Of course, crime and public safety are a big part of that. And while there is a connection between those things and light, there's a lot of sort of belief out there that I would characterize as myth, because it's not really backed up very well with evidence in terms of how light interacts with public safety. And then, of course, having an adequate amount of light on the roads is important. We want to preserve safety out there as well. So without going into too much detail, come talk to me afterward if you want to know about any of these in particular, but we're concerned about light pollution for all of these reasons. So why is all of this happening? Well, we just use too much light. It's overused relative to what our real needs are. So a lot of times when my organization rolls into town, people say, oh, here come the light Nazis, they're here to turn off your lights. And they get very defensive about that. They presume what the message is, that we prioritize the night sky and the wildlife, et cetera, over people, which is not the case. When what we're trying to point out is the fact that we can do better than we have now. We can do it with less light that is better targeted to the task, is not wasted, and that if we were simply more aware of that fact, either on the policy side of things or the lighting design side of things, we would find that we needed less light to do the same job. And I contend that we can actually, as I said, do it better than we do now because of the amount of waste that's involved in how we light the world right now. So what we're trying to do is raise awareness of the issue in a belief that that will eventually yield mindfulness on the part of the people that are tasked with making decisions about light, and that is ultimately what will lead us to a solution to this problem. So lastly, what can we do about this? I've told you about sort of what the global picture is, what the specific picture is in the desert of Southern California, what assets around here are threatened, for example, by light pollution, what harms are there to us as people, to the environment, et cetera. What can we actually do about this? So I guess the better question is, how do we solve this problem? And I always put this slide in my public talks because it's interesting to see the reaction to it. This is a part of the world as seen out the window of the International Space Station. This green kind of half circle up here is actually the atmosphere of the Earth emitting light. There is natural light in the night sky. It's not completely black if you go into the middle of the ocean or you go into space. There's light in the night sky. But all of this down here is all on the land or adjacent to the ocean, and this is human-caused activity. Can anybody guess where this might be? Who said North Korea? This table. All right. Well, y'all win the prize because you got that exactly right. I get all kinds of interesting guesses as to where this is, even when I tell them that it's in Asia. Some people think that maybe this is Hong Kong, for example, but it isn't. This is mainland China over here. This is the Yellow Sea. This is the Korean Peninsula. This is South Korea. The DMZ lights up very nicely right here. This is North Korea. This is their capital city. And I always follow up when I tell people this, and I've heard people gasp when I say where this is. And my point is, this is not our preferred solution to the problem of light pollution. I've had people say, wow, you guys should put a dark sky park in North Korea. I'll bet that's great. And I said, not for what it would do to the people who live there, right? This is not how we want to solve this problem. And by that I mean turning off the lights. It's not a good way to approach it. So what can we do about this instead in order to realistically solve this problem? And this applies whether you're talking about an individual homeowner, a business owner, an organization in the community that has property that they light. all the way on up to municipal government, county, state, national, what have you. There are basically 4 principles I want you to keep in mind. If you remember nothing else from this talk, it is this slide. There are 4 aspects of light that we want you to think about. And I use the term, remember the 4 P's, where the letter P stands for the word proper. The idea is for the lit area, for the amount of time, for the quantity of light needed to do a task, and for the color of that light, there are proper values that are based in good evidence. We know that it works. It provides enough light for safety at night. It provides light for placemaking in public spaces. It provides adequate security. And all it requires is that you consider where that light is going and for what purpose, and make sure that it lights that task adequately and preferably doesn't exceed that. If we could do that and that alone, we would solve this problem overnight. And the benefit of solving it is that it's unlike other kinds of environmental pollution. So if you think about air and water pollution, for example, you can stop the source of the polluting, but then you have to wait years or decades for that pollutant to work its way out of the natural system, right? You don't get instant results. But this changes literally at the speed of light, because once you make an improvement to an outdoor light, the waste is gone. It just leaves the scene immediately. And so you don't have to wait. You get instant results. So if in either individual actions or collective actions as society through public policy, if we just kept in mind those 4 points, we would effectively solve this problem. And I submit to you that that can be done in a way that's cost effective and in a way that can make all the stakeholders happy. And ultimately it comes down to this. If you pick better lights, you will get better nights as a result. So what this is showing, and this is a figure that's been reproduced in a lot of municipal codes in the US. This is an excerpt, actually, there are even more examples, is to show people basically don't do this, but do this instead. And you'll notice that it is as simple as making sure that the lamp is recessed up inside the light fixture. If we could get that far, we would have all the light on the ground where we needed it. None of it would be going into the night sky. Everybody would be happy. This is a solution that people can live with. The way we can do that, once we get enough of us together that decide we want things to be different, is we can codify it into law. In California, you have the law at your state level is really through your building code. There's something called Title 24 of the California Building Code, where outdoor lighting is addressed, and it has all of these features in it. Your current county code looks like this. Your code is pretty good. There are places for improvement. We're going to talk about that more. And then there are some individual municipalities within the county that have codes. And also I point to the management plan out at Joshua Tree National Park as an example. Of course, they're lighting for an ecologically sensitive situation, but a lot of the same principles apply to lighting generally. So we have lots of examples to look at. My organization offers a model lighting ordinance that has road-tested and court-tested language in it that's aimed at establishing a best practice for policy around outdoor lighting. And we're actually starting from a pretty good place, as opposed to other parts of the country that I go to that essentially have no regulation of any kind at the local level. And you have people who are just constantly at odds with each other because there's no means of resolving the disputes that develop about outdoor lighting short of suing people. And that's one thing that we're very clear about. We don't advocate litigating solutions to this problem. Let's figure it out, get it on the books so that everybody understands what the expectations are, and then get on with solving all the other big social problems that we have to deal with. So ultimately, this is what we're after. We want to prevent disputes from developing. That's why you put stuff into codes, right? Everybody knows what the expectation is. There's a mechanism for resolving the disputes, but we think that if you're mindful about this in the way it's applied in your outdoor lighting code, you go from a situation on the left, that's, my neighbor has a porch light, to the situation on the right where the light is now where it needs to be. It comes up to the property line and it stops. And now the person on the other side who was getting that light through the window is a lot happier with the outcome. This doesn't take anything away from anybody. It just deals with the problem of the waste and make sure that it's not creating a problem in the process. So the last idea I want to leave you with here is, because often we're asked, does it work? You know, if we use as an example that glow in the night sky as a symptom of the problem of light pollution, as one of its facets, if we make all these changes, does it actually do something? And I always use the example of the city that I'm from, which is Tucson in southern Arizona. And we have had an outdoor lighting ordinance for 47 years. We were one of the first significant cities in terms of population anywhere in the world to have one, and that was really motivated by the fact that we have a number of astronomical observatories within about an hour of the city. And we're still doing good science from the ground with telescopes because our city code, which mirrors our county code, so that there's no sudden discontinuous jump at the city boundary when you go into a different jurisdiction, has held that down. And part of how this worked is we recently, about 4 years ago now, converted the city's lighting over from an old system that was mostly sodium vapor, the kind of orangey yellow lights, I think there's still quite a bit of that around here, over to the white LED that's now becoming common. In the process, the goal was to make sure that the night sky did not get any brighter. And we did that. And we did it by lowering our light emissions. And you're going to think that I'm crazy when I say that we reduced our overall city lighting emissions from our street lighting system by almost 40%. And when I tell people that, they say, well, I assume that what then happened was you became a crime-infested, dangerous place to be at night where people are, drivers are hitting pedestrians and that sort of thing because there's now no longer enough light on the street. Well, one of the things that the city absolutely refused to move on was the notion that they would lower the brightness of the lighting on the streets to anything less than internationally recommended standards. We are still above those numbers. And yet, our light emissions dropped. The brightness of our night sky, before and after, dropped. And also, what these pictures on the bottom show are the change in the upward light that was seen by the satellite. So we have about 550,000 people in Tucson. And once the project was over, I asked the project manager with the city, so how many complaints did you get about the new lights? Because I figured that somebody was going to be upset that the lights weren't bright enough anymore, they didn't like the color or something like that. And he said, I can count the number of complaints we've received on 2 hands. Less than 10 complaints out of 500,000 people after swapping out 20,000 streetlights. It works, folks. It fundamentally works. The reason, incidentally, that I think nobody even noticed that there was a change was that a little blue goes a long way, as it turns out. And by that I mean the amount of blue light that's emitted by the city street lighting system. Blue light is especially bad if you're talking about the glow over a city, and it's for the same reason that the sky is blue during the day. And that is that those colors of light really strongly scatter through the atmosphere. So we were trying to avoid that as much as possible. But we had to add a little bit more because the old lighting system, the sodium vapor system, really didn't emit a lot of blue light, to tell you the truth. And by adding just a tiny little bit of blue, you're starting to put more useful light into the eye that it can actually do something with at low light levels that are typical of nighttime light levels in a city. And so the result is, even though we reduce the brightness of the lights, the eye perceives it to be the same brightness. People don't even realize that the lights are dimmer. You can do this, and consequently, you pay less over the course of the lifetime of the product for electricity. So a lot of municipalities have been sold on LED lighting simply because they were told that they were going to save a lot of money, which is true, and that it has environmental benefits potentially if it's implemented correctly. I'm suggesting you can go another step further. Even if you don't start like we did by lowering the light levels, you can dim these lights overnight. You couldn't do that with earlier technologies, and you can save more money. I guarantee you there aren't enough people around on your streets at 3 in the morning to justify lighting those streets as brightly as you do at 7 p.m. So yes, it does work. So the thought I'll leave you with here is that if we want to maintain views like this in Southern California, in the inland deserts. A lot of that in the future and the accessibility of that to people in the future depends on the choices that we're making today. And so that's why we're here. That's the ultimate answer to the questions that I was posing earlier, was that we want to try to preserve this and make things better for everybody in the process. But we need to be very careful about how we do that so that we can preserve this for the benefit of future generations. And with that, I think I'm on time. I thank you for your attention, and I am happy to take your questions. It's really short. Turn on the lights and you get shot. Back in the corner. Paul.
Locate and analyze the different types of fixtures that you've talked about there, getting down to the hardware, so we can look and see what changes do we specifically.
That's a good point. So the question is about how do you get the details of all your lighting that exists now? There's no really easy way to do it other than taking what I would call like a census, where either you start with plans that the municipal government might have, where they kept track of what lighting was installed where, but I guarantee you after about 20 years, nobody remembers. So at some level, it means going around and looking at lights. It depends on how many that you have. But if you have to do an inventory, that's the way to start. But I would check to see, if the municipality or if the county already has that list of what it thinks is out there, and that's sort of your first guess.
And then do you have a good library of fixtures that solve these problems?
Yes, that's a great question. So, let's assume that everybody's very excited about this and they say, yes, I get everything that you just said. I want to change my lights. I want to make them better. We have a program called the Fixture Seal of Approval program, where we publish a set of standards for lighting that make them dark sky friendly. And there's a searchable database on our website. So if you go to darksky.org, which is our website, and you look for the Fixture Seal program, you can search by application type, you can search by manufacturer. So if you need, so you say, I need walkway lights for my house, or I need flood lighting for my parking lot. We have about 3,000 products in the database, so there is plenty to choose from now. One last question.
If you don't mind. I know I can probably find this on the site. Could you tell me, approximately how many dark sky communities there are, that are recognized by the IDA?
There are 23 in the entire world, the majority of which are in the United States. And the greatest concentration is actually in Arizona. We have 6 of them. So it's still a pretty exclusive club.
And there's dark sky community and dark sky cities, which have separate.
They're actually the same. So we don't make a distinction. The dark sky communities they generally tend to be incorporated towns or cities, and the emphasis there is on getting the policy part right. So you don't even have to start with a dark sky. The idea is you'll get there eventually once the policy is properly implemented. So we work with the community to get a good lighting ordinance in place, do the education part with the residents, and over time we think that will restore the quality of the night sky over those places. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So nobody asked me to say this, but I want to note that we have a room full of people who work for government today, right? And we might think that this is all about what the government does. I think everybody should look in their packet to the IDA brochure and know that you can become a member of this organization for $35. And that's really, really important. Yes?
Nobody put you up to that, right?
But how can they be paying you so that you actually have this wonderful job? And how can we have the whole idea of international dark sky places unless there's an IDA?
Well, and thank you. And to that point, what that is supporting is the creation of resources for people who need them in different places. So, we have a wealth of material on our website that is freely available whether you're a member or not. We have a network of chapters throughout the world, the majority of which are here in the United States. And so, you have people here in your local community that represent the organization and can help with a lot of this. We need that. The night needs a voice, and my organization attempts to be that voice. So thank you. Paul.
Am I correct that implementing this sort of a program, generally speaking, is going to reduce the power usage in the city or community that is being used, and therefore carbon gases there'll be a reduction?
Yeah, that's right. So if a community adopted these ideas that I've been talking about, we know that that will necessarily lead to a lower consumption of light, because instead of throwing half of it away into the night sky, now all of it will be on the ground. And if you're now putting all of it on the ground, you need about half of what you needed before to get the same level of light. So right away, you're saving 50%. There's a bit of a temptation with the new LED lights to go out there and say, well, gosh, we're spending, $100,000 a year less on electricity. We could light a few more streets that aren't lit right now. Whether or not they actually need to be lit is a separate story. But it's only if you avoid the temptation to take the benefit of the lower cost of electricity and make sure that that doesn't go into just putting out more lights, because if you do that, you wipe out the environmental benefit. Because in the end, you consume the same amount of electricity, right? And you have the same amount of carbon emission that's associated with that. So if you're very mindful about it, because LED is great and we encourage it, and it draws a lot less power than the older technologies did, but we also have to make sure that we don't go too far in the other direction and wipe out that environmental benefit. That's right. Mm-hmm. Tom.
Just give us a quick note about how Joshua Tree National Park became a dark sky park and how it became important to this neighborhood regarding that.
Yeah, so Luke here can tell you about all the blood, sweat, and tears and frustration and that was associated with that. But to very briefly condense what our program does that recognizes parks, we work with places that have a dark sky resource, and Joshua Tree qualifies for that. The western side is a little uncomfortably close to Palm Springs, but the eastern half of the park is incredibly dark. It's like I said on that map, it's the last bit of sort of pristine darkness that's left in the California desert. But it's not just about having a dark sky. We don't just go around and look at that map of the world and say, you're dark, North Korea, here's an award for being so great. What we're trying to do is recognize and reward the effort that goes into locking that down and keeping it dark. So it's not just about having a dark sky. It's about going through and looking at all of the lighting that's on the site to begin with, making sure that they're walking the talk by having the appropriate fixtures. It's about educating the public so that the people who come to the park get this message, right? We want them to not only be aware of the night sky and how wonderful that is, but we also want them to notice the lighting, feel safe being in those places at night, and internalize some of that message. So that's really what underpins the designation that Joshua Tree received, is that it did walk the talk, and it went out there, fixed a bunch of lights. They do a lot of public programs. The education piece is ongoing, and it will continue indefinitely into the future. So really, rather than it being sort of the end of a process where we hand over that certificate, it's the beginning of a relationship between us and the park that persists indefinitely. And we're really proud to have them in, because it's hard to do this in this part of the world, to be quite honest. And so it really was an achievement for Joshua Tree to come into our program. Yeah.